What's up, tribe? How you guys doing? Come on in, come on in, come on in. Listen, we are going to be reading through the new case that was filed today against Diddy, and I do want to be clear as a trigger warning, you guys. They do talk about some very explicit things in this lawsuit. I have not read all of the details, so I just want to warn you ahead of time. I want to warn you ahead of time. Okay. All right. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into the things of the things of the things. Is school over? Yeah. Yeah, school's over. I don't know what time school gets out in your area, but yeah, school's out here. All right. I have the actual lawsuit again. Shout out to Tracy, who is always on it. My showrunner, she was able to pull the actual lawsuit for me earlier today, and I was like, y'all know I had to wait till work was over for me to come down here and talk to y'all about it. I know a lot of people have already discussed it. We're gonna read through the lawsuit. Looks like my internet is. I think it's stream, y'all. I really don't think it's my internet because when I do other stuff, I don't have this problem. But anyway, we're gonna make it do what it do. There's always money. That's why he's selling all those mansions. All right, let's get into it, you guys. I'm not gonna. You're in Texas. Oh, y'all get out. Texas gets out of school at 4 p.m. Ooh, y'all must go into school late. What time does school start? I'm not going to say Really B had it first, but she had it before breakfast. Right. Had I been home and not at work, had this happened during the summer, I could have came at y'all 9 o'clock this morning with this information. But, child, it is what it is. I still have my full-time job, honey. 8:15. And y'all get out at 4? Dang. You said 4 o'clock. Oh, 4 o'clock Central Standard. Well, 4 o'clock Central Standard is 3 o'clock my time. So y'all get out of school the same time we get out of school. Yeah. Yeah, 4 o'clock your time is 3 o'clock my time. So it's the same time, y'all. You're just in a different time zone. That's all. All right. Let's look at the document, you guys. So since y'all don't care, I mean, when I say y'all don't care, y'all know we're gonna go through. First of all, let's start it here. And again, this is this is a document that you can pull. All sorts of people have gone through this document. So, child, ain't nobody doing all of this. Okay. If you look on here, you see it was filed on September the 10th of 2024. It's 55 pages. And so that is why we are going to be skipping over some of this stuff because it is 55 pages long. So come on in, buckle up, get comfortable, get you a drink, get you a libation, do what you need to do. As you can see here, Dawn Angelique Richard, who is a former member of Danity Kane. Now, let me say this. I think all of us knew that Danity Kane had a story to tell. Hey, Angela. How dare I have a 9-to-5 job? Hey, boo. I think we all knew that Danity Kane had a story to tell. And I'm so interested in seeing what it says. But as you guys can see, she's suing anything that Diddy had ever had any parts of. And a lot of people are not including the fact that Harvey Pierre is also being sued. If you guys remember, Harvey Pierre used to be like the president of Bad Boy Records. And if you guys remember, he was also named in another lawsuit against Diddy, the young lady that said she flew from Detroit to New York and she was in the studio. Remember, she said that she was assaulted by Diddy and by Harvey Pierre. So remember, she's the one that had the pictures. They had her face blacked out, but she had the pictures, and a lot of y'all were trying to say that it was what's that young lady that 50 Cent sued? What's her name? Xavier, you know who I'm talking about. You know who I'm talking about. Tierra Marie, right. A lot of y'all was saying it was Tierra Marie, but I don't think it's Tierra Marie. But either way, her face is blacked out. Remember, Diddy is trying to he filed paperwork to try to get her name released. Yes, some people said it was Nivea. Some other people said it was Nivea. So we don't know who it is. But whoever it is, Harvey Pierre is also a part of that lawsuit. But as you can see, anything that Diddy name has ever touched is on here. You see Ciroc down in here, Universal. You see all of that. All of them people are being named in the lawsuit, right? we're not going to necessarily read through the preliminary statement because everything that's in the preliminary statement will be outlined more in more detail in the statement of facts. As you can see, again, it just talks about all the people that are part of the lawsuit. And then, you know, and it talks about all the people that she's naming and why she's naming them. And then she talks about jurisdiction. Well, her lawyers talk about jurisdiction. Basically, they're saying why they have the right to file this lawsuit in the jurisdiction where they filed it. Factual allegations is what we want to know about. So, again, before I get started, I just want to be very clear that this lawsuit is very graphic. Think about the Cassie lawsuit with a lot of the graphic things. Not the first few pages is about who Dawn is and why she's awesome. Okay, Angela. Okay, boo. So let's get into the statement of facts. Let me change this up a little bit so y'all can see this better. Let me change it up a little bit. Okay, y'all can see it a little bit better. But again, I'm sure y'all can get the copy if y'all really want to get a copy of it. Okay. Miss Richard is selected to be Mr. Combs, to be in Mr. Combs' all-female group Danity Kane after competing on MTV's Making the Band. In or around 2004, Miss Richard was selected to participate in season 3 of MTV Network's reality TV show Making the Band. The show centered around the formation and development of a new musical group under the mentorship of Mr. Combs. The contestants would compete and be chosen by Mr. Combs to form a band, which will go on to create albums and perform. For aspiring artists like Miss Richard, Making the Band represented a concrete path to a career in the entertainment industry. Miss Richard appeared on season 3 and 4 of Making the Band, which first aired in 2005, and the season 5 of Making His Band, which aired in 2009. One of thousands of contestants, Miss Richard, along with approximately 12 other women, were selected to participate in season 3 of Making the Band. 5 women, including Miss Richard, were ultimately chosen to be in the group Danity Kane, which was named by Miss Richard. Prior to and including the first Danity Kane album, Making the Band was filmed entirely at Daddy's house recording studio, and they give the address. The Making the Band content that focused on Danity Kane's work on his second album, Welcome to the Dollhouse, was filmed at Daddy's house and at Mr. Combs' Miami residence. Other Making the Band episodes included Los Angeles and a third filming location. Upon information and belief to create Making the Band, camera crews filmed 24 hours a day, gathering months' worth of footage to condense it into mere hours of entertainment for viewers. Danity Kane released a self-titled debut album in August of 2006 and his second album, Welcome to the Dollhouse, in March of 2008. Danity's Kane first album sold over, I'm going to say DK from now on, so just so y'all know, sold over 400,000 copies? Yeah. Damages to Miss Richard for unpaid salaries are estimated at $1 million, and Danity Kane's second album, so that's $4 million. I'm sorry, y'all, $4 million. Welcome to the Dollhouse sold over 2 million copies. Damages to Miss Richard for unpaid salaries and royalties are estimated at $500,000. Damages on unpaid wages for touring on over 100 dates for Miss Richards with Danity Kane are estimated at $1.8 million. So she's suing for money he owed her too. So she's also suing for money. Mr. Combs fired bandmate Aubrey O'Day and Juanita D. Woods from DK on live television at the height of his fame in 2008, which resulted in Danity Kane being disbanded in 2009. During the audition on the set of Making the Band, Mr. Combs projected an aura of superiority, wealth, and power. Mr. Combs regularly wore sunglasses and avoided looking the female contestant in the eyes, contributing to the atmosphere of uncertainty and intimidation. During auditions, Mr. Combs spoke to the female contestants in a hostile, condescending manner, making disparaging gender-based remarks such as calling them fat, ugly, bitches, and hoes. Miss Richard felt threatened and intimidated by Mr. Combs' blatant disdain for the young women like herself who were excited for the opportunity to be on his show. Once the band was made, Mr. Combs contempt for the women was readily apparent as he continued to display aggressive and hostile behavior towards Miss Richard and her all-female DK bandmates. Mr. Combs regularly referred to the 5 women as bitches and hoes and denigrated their physical appearance. By way of example, Mr. Combs stated that Miss Richard was too skinny and needed to do something about her face. On one occasion, on or around 2005, during the first season of Making the Band 3, Miss Richard observed Mr. Combs' ex-partner and the mother of his 3 children, Kim Porter, leaving his residence studio in tears with visible facial injuries, including a lacerated lip. Realizing that Mr. Combs was capable of committing acts of violence against women caused Miss Richard to feel deep apprehension and fear that Mr. Combs could one day physically harm her. So, 1, she's saying, I want my money. 2, she's saying, I saw him assault Kim Porter. Let's keep going, child. Let's keep going. Miss Richard was present when Mr. Combs was introduced to Cassie Ventura for the first time in or around 2006. The moment Mr. Combs first saw Miss Ventura, his demeanor noticeably shifted. Mr. Combs positioned himself directly in front of Miss Ventura's seat, invading her personal space and fixated on her with an intense, unyielding stare, isolating her from the other people in the room, including Miss Ventura's then boyfriend, music producer Ryan Leslie. Coincidentally, the first meeting between Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura was the first time Miss Richards was in Mr. Combs' presence without a camera crew filming. Observing Mr. Combs behave in such an intimidating, predatory manner the first time that they were off camera made Miss Richards feel deeply apprehensive and afraid of him. Subsequently, Miss Ventura ended her relationship with Mr. Leslie and began dating Combs, who would become violent and abusive towards her. For the majority of Miss Richards' tenure as a member of Danity, Kane, Diddy, Dirty Money, Mr. Combs required her to remain at his various residences and studios in New York, Los Angeles, Florida, and New Jersey for activities such as recording, rehearsing, dressing, preparing costumes, and exercising. Throughout the production of Making the Band 3 and 4, Combs deprived Miss Richards and her DK bandmates of basic needs such as adequate food and sleep. When Miss Richard or her DK bandmates requested meals or rest, Mr. Combs refused and chastised them with derogatory comments like, "You bitches don't want this," or "Y'all not hungry enough," and "I'm paying you bitches to work." The demeaning behavior gradually undermined Miss Richards' confidence and contributed significantly to her growing feelings of insecurity and fear of reprisal from Mr. Combs. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs would regularly be awake for prolonged periods of time because he was high on drugs. During these periods, Mr. Combs demanded continuous access to Miss Richards and her DK bandmates, often forcing them to record and rehearse for stretches of 36 to 48 hours without breaks. Forced to choose between eating and sleeping, Miss Richards lost a significant amount of weight, weighing approximately 100 pounds at the height of 5'4". Miss Richards began to normalize these extreme conditions and perceive them as standard requirements for her participation in Danity Kane. Child. No, yeah, I think her lawyer is Lisa Bloom. It was Bloom. Yeah, I believe it's Lisa Bloom. Yeah. I leave that over there to the side, child. Mr. Combs regularly sent his associates to wake Miss Richards and her Danity Kane bandmates in the overnight hours so he could watch them rehearse. The regularity of these disturbances led Miss Richards to adapt by sleeping in a sitting position, fully dressed and with makeup on, heightening her anxiety. Over time, this abnormal sleeping arrangement came to feel routine, further normalizing Mr. Combs' evasive demands. In addition to exhausting rehearsals, Mr. Combs required Miss Richards and her bandmates to participate in intense workouts with a personal trainer. On one occasion, while running on the beach, Miss Richards became so dehydrated she vomited. Instead of offering medical assistance, MTV Network camera crew filmed the incident, contributing to her acceptance of such treatment as part of her professional life. The unrelenting and rigorous schedule of rehearsals, performances, and near constant filming that Mr. Combs imposed caused Miss Richards to experience extreme weight loss, dehydration, fatigue, and painful rashes from the microphone pack she was required to wear on her back. These conditions intensified Miss Richards' feelings of powerlessness as she increasingly viewed them as part of her professional reality and feared the consequences of any resistance. In a further assertion of power and dominance, Mr. Combs insisted on holding meetings while dressed only in his underwear. On one occasion in 2008 in his Miami residence, Mr. Combs emailed Ms. Richards directing her to meet him in the living room. When she arrived, he was wearing only his underwear. Ms. Richards asked Mr. Combs to put clothes on, but he refused, stating, "This is my fucking house." Mr. Combs then conducted a meeting lasting approximately an hour while dressed in his underwear, causing Ms. Richards to feel violated and embarrassed and amplifying her feelings of powerlessness. Now, as you guys can see, they are building the case, right? Thank you, DB. They are building this case. They are showing you all these different examples of how she is feeling powerlessness, right? For a legal argument, I hope she has medical records. Well, some of it is documented on camera, right? She said that they filmed her throwing up on the beach, but I'm sure, I believe she probably has things to back up a lot of this. Maybe not every single thing she says, but I'm sure there's like things like emails can be documented. A lot of stuff that happened on MTV can be documented, yeah. Following the official DK breakup in early 2009, effectuated by Mr. Combs, Miss Richards experienced significant financial hardship. With no prospective opportunities for employment within the entertainment field, Miss Richards spent several months traveling from Baltimore to Daddy's House Recording Studio in New York without pay or an allocated budget. Mr. Combs promised Miss Richards compensation would result in payment of licensing fees and royalties pursuant to her contract with Bad Boys Records. However, no such compensation was ever reported or paid to Miss Richards. Damages relative to these continuing copyright infringements will be proved at trial. Okay. Now we're going to get into the dirty money stuff. By approximately the fall of 2009, many of Miss Richards' compositions had been recorded by other Bad Boy recording artists. Due to the success of her compositions, Miss Richards was invited to meet with musical artist Kalina Harper. And shortly thereafter, Mr. Combs, Miss Richards, Miss Harper formed a new group, Diddy Dirty Money. Initial recording for Diddy Dirty Money's album, Last Train to Paris, took place in Mr. Combs' home on Danity Avenue in Los Angeles. On the first day of recording, Miss Richards and Miss Harper arrived at Mr. Combs' home and waited in the kitchen where Mr. Combs' girlfriend, Miss Ventura, was frying eggs for him. Miss Richards observed Mr. Combs come down the stairs looking high on drugs, enter the kitchen, approach Miss Ventura, and scream, I've been asking you for my shit. I can't stand you, bitch. You never do it right. Mr. Combs then pushed Miss Ventura against the wall and choked her, then picking up the scalding hot pan of eggs and threw it at her, causing her to fall to the ground in a fetal position. Cursing and screaming, Mr. Combs dragged Miss Ventura up the stairs. Now, I got to put a pin in that. I got to put a pin in that. Y'all. I'm gonna keep reading. I'm just gonna keep reading. I'm sorry. Frozen in shock and terror, Miss Richards heard glass shattering, crashing, and banging noises from as Mr. Combs dragged Miss Ventura up the stairs. Miss Richard wanted to intervene and help Miss Ventura, but Miss Harper adamantly refused to interfere in Mr. Combs' relationship and physically led Miss Richards out of the residence. Terrified and shaken, Miss Richards returned to her hotel, where she was unable to sleep due to worrying about Miss Ventura for her own safety. The following day, Miss Richard received a call demanding that she return to Mr. Combs' residence to continue recording. Mr. Combs brought Miss Richard and Miss Harper into the recording room at his studio, locked the door, dimmed the lights, and gave each of them flowers. Mr. Combs went on ad lib stating, "This is normal. This was just a lover's argument where no one was hurt. That's what love is. I'm giving you an opportunity. If you want to make it, you'll shut your mouth. If you say anything, there'll be consequences." Mr. Combs further warned that people end up missing, being threatened while locked for over 20 minutes in a small enclosed space with Mr. Combs after observing him violently assault Miss Ventura the day before. Miss Richards was terrified and genuinely believed that Mr. Combs would follow through on his threats. In or around November of 2009, after the Soul Train Awards in Atlanta, Georgia, Mr. Combs flew Miss Richards and Miss Harper to his house in New York on his private jet for an after party. There were many well-known celebrities at the after party, and copious amounts of illegal drugs were being openly consumed. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs had arranged for dozens of young women and girls, some of whom appeared to be underage, to be transported to the party. The women arrived wearing little to no clothing and were given drugs and alcohol. Many of them appeared lethargic or passed out while Mr. Combs and his guests performed sexual acts on them. Miss Richards believed that her presence at the party was a test to see whether Mr. Combs could trust her. Listen, I'm telling y'all now, that sentence is a very interesting sentence where it says to be transported to the party. Y'all, I told y'all that my source told me they trying to build a case for Diddy for trafficking. That is a definition, underage girls being transported. I'm telling you what the people said. That's a very interesting sentence. We're going to keep reading. Mr. Combs repeatedly said things like, "This is a buffet. Enjoy yourselves. This is what we do. This is how we party." Miss Richard felt shocked and horrified at the sight of Mr. Combs and his guests violating incapacitated young women and implored Mr. Combs' personal assistant, Capricorn Clark, to allow her to leave. Miss Clark insisted that Miss Richard wait 15 minutes for Miss Clark to make it make sense. This is to make Miss Richard exit less conspicuous so that Mr. Combs would not notice that she had left, knowing that she was not free to leave and had to wait for Miss Clark to help her orchestrate her departure. Miss Richard experienced feelings of panic and being trapped against her will. Again, pay attention to the language, you guys. Pay attention to the language. Remember, Capricorn Clark was named in the other lawsuit with Lil Rod. Remember, she's all up and through. Actually, she's in a couple of these lawsuits. So Capricorn Clark name keep coming up, y'all. Her name keep coming up. She's using the word trapped against her will. That could be kidnapping. Remember what happened with O.J. Simpson. Depending on the state law and the way the kidnapping language is written. This is very interesting, y'all. Very interesting. We're going to keep reading. Hey, Peace. What's up, boo? Yes. Well, I'm reading from the lawsuit, child. I'm reading from the lawsuit. But yeah, allegedly. Mr. Combs regularly placed Miss Richards in similar situations with no means to escape. At Mr. Combs' drug-fueled parties, his guests, including Miss Richards, were required to surrender their phones upon entry. Mr. Combs kept the doors locked and guarded by security personnel, making it impossible for Miss Richard to leave without alerting Mr. Combs that she had done so. Mr. Combs hired police officers to attend his party, sending a clear message to guests that his influence extended to law enforcement officers and creating a climate of fear and a tactic a tacit warning that reporting him to authorities will be both unacceptable and futile. Well, on many occasions, Mr. Combs had parties in his Miami, Florida residence that lasted for several days. At one of the parties, Miss Richards witnessed Mr. Combs openly stating that he had arranged for busloads of young exotic girls such as mixed Black and Asian, Indonesian, and albino. Once again, Miss Richards observed inebriated young girls being sexually violated by Mr. Combs and his guests. In a state of panic and terror, Ms. Richard fled to the bathroom. Mr. Combs had insisted she stay in and barricaded the door shut with furniture. Mr. Combs openly assaulted Miss Ventura in front of Miss Richards and other witnesses on multiple occasions. On one occasion, on or around the fall of 2009, Diddy Dirty Money was in New York preparing to perform at a festival. Inside their vehicle, Mr. Combs grabbed Miss Ventura's neck, pulled her out of the van onto the grass, and pinned her head down, choking her while yelling, "You gonna get fucked up today." This incident took place in the backstage area just outside the festival and was entirely visible to passersby. In another instance, in or around early 2010, Mr. Combs punched Miss Ventura in the face in the bathroom of a party in Los Angeles. Frequently, when Miss Ventura attempted to voice an opinion or stand up to Mr. Combs, he would strike her or wrap his hands around her throat and choke her. On one of the first several occasions, some of this language, the way it's written, that they observed Mr. Combs assaulted Miss Ventura. Miss Richard and Miss Harper spoke with Miss Ventura to support and encourage her in escaping her abusive relationship with Mr. Combs. Every time that Miss Richard and Miss Harper tried to intervene, Mr. Combs learned of the conversation and became irate. Mr. Combs screamed at the women, "Y'all bitches don't get in my relationship. Don't tell my bitch what she need to be doing. Just make money and shut the fuck up. I end artists. I shelve careers. You could be missing. And you bitches want to die today," among other threats. I mean, I'm going to keep reading, child. I'm just pausing to read the comments. Let me keep reading. In or around 2009 or early 2010, Bad Boy Entertainment entered an agreement with Interscope A&M Records. Upon information and belief, Bad Boy was paid $50 million in exchange for Bad Boy's future releases being distributed through Interscope. In doing so, Mr. Combs intended to capitalize on Interscope's significant resources and enhance the promotion and sales of Bad Boy's releases, including Diddy Dirty Money's upcoming album. In the weeks and months leading up to Bad Boy Interscope deal, Mr. Combs had frequent meetings with producers and then CEO of Interscope Records, Jimmy Iovine. On one such occasion, Combs hosted a dinner at a West Hollywood, California restaurant, which Miss Richard and Miss Harper were required to attend. Among the guests at the dinner were celebrities like Neo, Usher, as well as Mr. Iovine at the dinner. Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura had an argument in front of the dinner guests. Mr. Combs hissed at Miss Ventura in a screaming whisper and forcibly punched her in the stomach, causing her to double over in visible pain. Crying, Miss Clark escorted Miss Ventura out of the restaurant, and Mr. Combs remained and continued socializing with the dinner guests. At this point, Interscope Records clearly had actual knowledge that Combs was dangerous around females and that Combs was willing to brazenly batter a female in public. So that's why she included Interscope Records in this lawsuit, because she said, hey, they knew that he was doing these things. Okay. Even after Mr. Iovine watched Mr. Combs commit a violent assault in front of numerous high-profile witnesses, the Bad Boy Interscope deal took place and remained in effect, providing Mr. Combs with immense financial rewards and enabling him to commit further acts of violence without fear of repercussions. Watching Mr. Combs openly assault Miss Ventura in front of Mr. Iovine and various celebrities and observing the other powerful music industry representatives were complicit in Mr. Combs' behavior, amplified Ms. Richards' fear that Mr. Combs could one day harm her and that his actions would be accepted and normalized by everyone surrounding him. Now, I'm going to say the same thing in this lawsuit as I'm reading through it, as we said about Cassie's lawsuit. And that doesn't make it true, right? What I'm getting ready to say doesn't make it true. However, I find it very interesting that she's naming specific names and events that can be easily proven or disproven, right? We were at a festival, and this is where the festival was. We were at this studio during this time. We had, when Diddy was getting ready to sign with Interscope Records, he hosted this party. And these are the people who were there, right? And again, remember, Cassie's lawsuit, part of the reason why I believe, in my opinion, part of the reason why I believe that lawsuit was settled so fast is because Cassie didn't put everything in that lawsuit that she had. She had some in the chamber. You know what I'm saying? She kept a clip, right? And I find it interesting that she is being very specific in some of these incidents and naming people. She named his personal assistant. She named Usher. She named, Neo. She named Jimmy Iovine. Jimmy Iovine is a heavy hitter, you guys. He's not, he ain't nobody to play with if it ain't what it is. So, again, I'm just reading and giving my thoughts as we read through this. Just giving my thoughts. I'm going to keep reading. As part of the agreement between Bad Boy and Interscope Records, Interscope heavily promoted Diddy. Diddy's Dirty Money, The Last Train to Paris album. Mr. Iovine presented Mr. Combs with a demo of Coming Home for him to produce, a song that would become a multi-platinum hit. Mr. Iovine was encouraging Mr. Combs to develop a new sound for the album, into which Interscope was investing significant resources. Miss Richard, Miss Harper, and Miss Ventura all provided vocal performances for this project. Released in November 2010, the album The Last Train to Paris became Diddy Dirty Money's most commercially successful project, providing vast financial rewards to both Interscope and Mr. Combs. Notice she ain't say her. In or around fall of 2009, Diddy Dirty Money began recording the song Love Comes Down. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs continued to use drugs that caused him to remain awake for prolonged periods of time. When he was awake, he would demand that Miss Richard and Miss Harper record in the studio, where they would spend 3 to 4 consecutive days recording without a break, to eat or to sleep. Mr. Combs required Miss Richard and Miss Harper to remain at his home, continuously denying the opportunity to return to their hotel rooms for breaks. The degree of control Mr. Combs exercised over Miss Richard's daily life and basic needs exacerbated the significant power imbalance and threatening atmosphere that ensured Miss Richard's compliance with his demands. Mr. Combs regularly left the studio and required Miss Richard and Miss Harper to stay and write verses to songs. Occasionally, Miss Richard tried to leave to get something to eat or to go to the hotel. Whenever Miss Richard tried to leave, Mr. Combs would call and demand, "Where the fuck are you? And we have an album to make." Mr. Combs frequently made threats, especially if they asked for food or rest, stating, "You're a bitch. I don't want to see your fucking face. I make niggas go missing, and I make things go away." Each time Miss Richard returned to the studio, immediately believing that Mr. Combs was capable of following through with those threats. Mr. Combs criticized Miss Richard for being too skinny, yet denied her request for food and demanded that she drink only peanut butter shakes. Ooh. Mr. Combs had full meals prepared by a chef and ate them in front of Miss Richard and Miss Harper, never offering them any food. Damn. Miss Richards and Miss Harper begged for food and rest breaks, but Mr. Combs refused, making statements such as, "Absolutely fucking not. And this is what it takes to be great." Mr. Combs' responses underscored the threat he posed and heightened Miss Richards' concerns for her safety and well-being. As for Miss Richards, continued to work nonstop, transitioning between the studio, rehearsals, workouts, and back to the studio. She became severely dehydrated and experienced chronic stomach cramping from being undernourished and excessively thin. On the numerous occasions that she told Mr. Combs that she was not feeling well, he called her lazy and dismissed her health concerns, instilling in her further apprehension of communicating her needs. In or around the summer of 2010, Miss Richard experienced abdominal pain, swollen glands, and a fever. She was hospitalized and diagnosed with arrhythmia, arthralgia. Sorry, y'all. I know I butchered that. But it's joint pain due to overuse, sprains, tendonitis, and infection. That's what it is. Okay. Anemia and a low white blood cell count. Ms. Richard presented Mr. Combs with her medical records, specifically specifying that she needs to emphasize eating well, being adequately hydrated, and getting adequate rest. But Mr. Combs ordered her to report to the studio the next day for another multi-day recording session. Mr. Combs' blatant disregard for her health and well-being cemented Ms. Richards' fear of his authority and control over her career and health. Ms. Richards continued to witness Mr. Combs' abuse toward Ms. Ventura. Ms. Ventura often wore sunglasses and makeup in an attempt to hide the visible injuries. These incidents further solidified Ms. Richards' fear that Mr. Combs, as they were constant reminders of the physical danger she was potentially in. Wow. Mr. Combs often exhibited uncontrollable anger during recording sessions, throwing objects like albums, laptops, and food against the wall or at individuals. Mr. Combs frequently flew into frenzied, unpredictable rages. Miss Richard feared making any misstep that could direct his anger toward her. However, her fears went beyond her immediate physical safety because she had witnessed Mr. Combs' violent nature side that the world had not yet seen. She feared that falling out of his good graces, or worse, standing up to him or speaking out against him, could result in serious harm to her. Miss Richard frequently thought about Mr. Combs' threats about making people go missing and feared taking any action that would label her as a target. Despite Mr. Combs' violent threats and misogyny, Diddy Dirty Money experienced significant sales of records, selling 2 million copies of one single, 500,000 copies at another. In the U.S. and Australia, 5 million single copies. Ms. Richards' unpaid wages and royalties are estimated at 1.2 million. Ms. Richards' unpaid touring wages are estimated at 350,000 for touring dates within the United States alone. Again, pay me my money. Pay me my money. I remember seeing Dawn and thinking she was awfully thin. Yeah, I think I remember something. And, that stuff was so long ago. Somebody who remembers tell me. I feel like I remember Dawn talking about having stomach issues. And going back to Angela's point, if she was hospitalized, there is a record of what she's saying. If she was hospitalized and got a diagnosis from the doctor, she absolutely has a record of at least that much. So, again, as we're reading through this lawsuit, I'm just thinking of things that we know she's saying there's some cooperation or that there will be some sort of evidence of, right? Okay, let's keep going. Y'all know we got a long way to go. I told y'all to buckle up. We got a long way to go. We got a long way to go. All right, let's keep going. Now we get into Ciroc, Diddy, and non-payment. In or around the summer of 2009, Miss Richard and Mr. Harper and Miss Harper were required by Combs to perform as part of Diddy Dirty Money and attend numerous promotional events, including late or overnight parties, all of which were under contract between Mr. Combs, Ciroc Vodka, or between Mr. Combs and Diddy Beats, pursuant, to the Bad Boy Interscope record deal. Miss Richards was never compensated for the extra time she spent fulfilling Mr. Combs' promotional contracts, including the Ciroc and Diddy Beats campaign. Mr. Combs was paid approximately $250,000 per Ciroc appearance. Mr. Combs did not compensate Miss Richard or Miss Harper for these appearances, other than just $5,000 each on a handful of occasions. Mr. Combs' ongoing explanation for withholding compensation was that their appearances were a requirement for their tour. Additionally, Ms. Richard was required to appear and to promote Diddy Beats through parties, albums, songs, and videos. Over time, Mr. Combs was paid $6.2 million for 25 Ciroc shows that Ms. Richard was required to attend. Following each show, Ms. Richard and Ms. Popper approached Mr. Combs to inquire about their insufficient and sporadic payments. Mr. Combs routinely responded with statements such as, "You bitches aren't grateful, and you don't want this." Ms. Richard estimated losses from Ciroc campaign promotion totaling at least $1.5 million. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs received an advance on the Diddy beats for which Ms. Richards received no compensation. All right. I'm going to pause here again before I keep reading because now this next section is titled Mr. Combs Sexually Harasses and Assaults Ms. Richards. So again, I'm giving you guys a chance. It's a trigger warning if y'all need to leave. Okay. Okay. Yes, it's 55 pages. I said that at the beginning. I know some of y'all came in late, but this lawsuit is 55 pages and child, we on page 20. So buckle up. We got a while. We got a ways to go. But I want y'all to know exactly what's in the lawsuit and not just the clickbait or the headlines. We're reading everything. Okay. We're reading through everything. Tracy got the bar open. So y'all put y'all drink orders in the chat. Tracy will get y'all some libations now. Tracy got the bar open. So put your drink orders in the chat and she'll take care of you. Okay. It's 188 of y'all in here. It's almost 200 people in here. Angela's here. So if you need to go up to the upstairs balcony, if you need to get on to the upstairs balcony, Angela's here to help you out. And any of my members that are lit up in green, the VIP section is open. Listen, we getting comfortable, all right? Going over to the VIP section and get, take care of some things, all right? Okay. All right. Between approximately 2009 and 2011, throughout Diddy Dirty Money's recording process, rehearsals, and performances, excuse me, Mr. Combs repeatedly ordered Miss Richard to strip down to her underwear. He frequently referred to her as a bitch or a whore and made demeaning remarks about her body, alternatingly calling her lazy, fat, ugly, and skinny. Child, how you gonna be fat and skinny at the same time? Particularly in front of his friends, producers, and bodyguards. Again, she's naming people who can corroborate these stories. Mr. Combs frequently held meetings with Miss Richard wearing only his underwear, despite Miss Richard's protests and repeated requests for him to put clothing on. In response, Mr. Combs called her a bitch and a whore and reminded her that she should be grateful for the opportunity to be there. Often while they were recording in the studio, Mr. Combs would hold parties, and she put that in air quotes, in quotes, where he would invite young men and women who were often scantily dressed and appeared underage to use drugs and engage in sex acts. Ms. Richard observed Mr. Combs and his colleagues kissing, groping, and inappropriately touching the young women. Upon information and belief, the participants often left the immediate area to have sex and returned shortly thereafter. On numerous occasions between approximately 2009 and 2011, under the guise of preparing for performances, Mr. Combs would intrude into Ms. Richards' changing room at Daddy's house unannounced while Ms. Richards was undressed. Even though a female stylist was present and assisting Ms. Richards with her wardrobe, Mr. Combs would grope Ms. Richards' body, including her bare buttocks and her chest area near her breast. With no legitimate purpose and without Ms. Richards' consent, Mr. Combs caressed her buttocks to show the stylist where he wanted her high-waisted panties positioned and attempted to touch her breast, claiming to show the stylist where he wanted her bra straps to go. When Mr. Combs would enter the changing room, Ms. Richards would cover her chest and her hands to prevent Mr. Combs from seeing or touching her breasts. When Mr. Combs would touch her body, she would attempt to swat his hands away and state, "Don't touch me." He would frequently smack Ms. Richards' bare buttocks and often commented on her body, noting that although she was too skinny, she had an ass. Ignoring her visible and communicated discomfort, Mr. Combs persisted and continued to intrude when Ms. Richards was in the dressing room, continued to touch her buttocks and breast area under the guise of showing the stylist what to do, and continued to smack her buttocks without her consent. In or around October 2010, Dirty Money performed in Glasgow, Scotland, where Mr. Combs engaged in overt sexual advances toward Miss Richard. On numerous occasions when Miss Richard exited the dressing room fully styled, Mr. Combs looked at her approvingly and smacked her buttocks while making comments such as, "You're looking good. Okay, Don. Okay. I see what this is, in a flirtatious tone. Each time, Miss Richard moved away and asked him not to touch her, but he disregarded her protest. On their last night in Glasgow, Miss Richard witnessed Mr. Combs and several other males gang banging Mr. Combs' female assistant at the hotel pool. Miss Richard immediately left and went to her hotel room. On their flight back to the United States the next day, Miss Richard asked Mr. Combs where his assistant was. Where his assistant was. Mr. Combs replied, "I don't give a fuck where that bitch is." Miss Richards later learned that Mr. Combs had taken his assistant passport with him to the United States, leaving her stranded in the United Kingdom. What? What? In Glasgow, Miss Harper confided in Miss Richards that her husband and manager, Tony Vick, Mr. Vick, was abusive. After an especially severe assault, she confided in Miss Richards her exit plan from the relationship. However, Miss Harper and Mr. Vick reconciled, and both Mr. Combs and Mr. Vick, who had a close relationship, learned of Miss Richards' role in helping Miss Harper. Both Mr. Combs and Mr. Vick became noticeably distrustful of Miss Richard, which exacerbated her fears of harm and reprisal. Okay, so Kalina was allegedly in an abusive relationship herself, which is why she told Dawn to stay the hell out of other people's relationship, because she had a whole situation going on allegedly with her man. Okay. When Mr. Combs would require his Diddy Dirty Money bandmates to stay at his residence in Miami, Miss Richards would barricade herself inside of her room at night, placing heavy furniture against the door because she feared being harmed in her sleep. In or around December 2010, Miss Richard, Miss Harper, and Miss Ventura were in Mr. Combs' Los Angeles home when Mr. Combs stated, "I want to gift you fake titties for Christmas." Mr. Combs reached out and cut Miss Richards' breast without her permission and stated, "You're A. I'm thinking D." Miss Richard recoiled in shock and left the room. Throughout the above-mentioned time period, when Miss Richards resisted Mr. Combs' advances, Mr. Combs retaliated by denying her singing parts to songs, removing her from songs, refusing to allow her to sing in performances, and turning her microphone off during performances. The more Miss Richards rebuffed his advances, the more he retaliated. I don't know. Yeah, I'm still stuck when he left that lady over in Switzerland. I'm still stuck that he left that lady in Switzerland. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, the UK. I'm sorry. My bad. I'm making up countries. He left her in the UK. I'm sorry. Thank you, Xavier. My bad. I don't know where Switzerland came from. He took that lady passport and left her in another country. I need a sip. Hold on. Y'all. Remember, her husband got mad on Love and Hip Hop because he thought he was going to be a part of a threesome with Carly Red. You know, I guess I wasn't watching Love and Hip Hop then, because I don't remember that. But I didn't watch every season of Love and Hip Hop, so that must be a season before I was, before my time. Wow. This next section is called Mr. Combs Assaults and Falsely Imprisons Miss Richard. So again, I'm letting you know what I'm getting ready to read. So govern yourselves accordingly. Again, if you need some libation or you need a shot, go and drop it in the chat. Tracy gonna take care of you. Okay? In or around December of 2010, Diddy Dirty Money was prepared for an upcoming performance on Saturday Night Live. As usual, rehearsals lasted for days without the opportunity to eat or rest, and the rehearsal schedule was unpredictable. After waiting all day for Mr. Combs to call or send a car, Miss Richard received a phone call from Mr. Combs demanding, "Where the fuck are you bitches? You bitches don't want this. Y'all don't deserve to have someone pick you up. Get a cab." Miss Richards and Miss Harper immediately took a taxi to SIR Studios. And it's the address. Anxious because Mr. Combs sounded enraged. Upon their arrival at the studio, Mr. Combs and Harvey Pierre, so here's where Harvey is coming in, y'all, were waiting for them in the lobby. Mr. Combs screamed obscenities at them. "Where the fuck were you bitches? You bitches don't want to win. You don't want this. I'm so tired of y'all." Miss Richard noticed that people in the lobby were reacting to Mr. Combs' tirade. Embarrassed, Miss Richard asked Mr. Combs to stop swearing and calling them bitches in front of everyone. Mr. Combs' facial expression shifted, and he stepped towards Miss Richard, raised his arm, and swung his fist towards her face. Believing that Mr. Combs was going to hit her, Miss Richard braced for the impact. Before Mr. Combs could strike her, his bodyguard grabbed her, escorted her out of the studio, and forced her into the bad boys' Bentley that was parked outside. Miss Harper ran after Miss Richards, and Mr. Combs' bodyguard closed and locked the Bentley's door with both women inside. Inside the vehicle, Miss Richards realized there were no interior door handles, and they were locked inside with no way to escape. Miss Richards' belongings were in the studio, and she was able to call her father from Miss Harper's cell phone. Miss Richards relayed to her father what had happened and that she needed help and feared she would go missing. Moments later, Mr. Combs' bodyguard removed only Miss Harper from the Bentley, leaving Miss Richards locked in a car alone for over 2 hours. Miss Richards screamed as loudly as she could, but no one responded. It was late evening in the wintertime. The windows were heavily tinted, and the interior of the car was dark, except for faint interior lights. Miss Richards' belongings and winter coat were in the studio, while the ignition was off and there was no heat. With Mr. Combs' prior threats and violence running through her mind, Miss Richards felt sheer panic, terror, and feelings of claustrophobia at being locked in a small, dark, enclosed space with no way to communicate or call for help. She began to feel cold and fear for her life, not knowing when or if she would be released. Y'all, this motherfucker. Miss Richards' father drove from New York to Baltimore. That's what he was supposed to do. And arrived at the studio approximately 2 hours. Bitch, he got to New York from Baltimore in 2 hours. Oh, he was hauling it. Baby, he was hauling it. He got from Baltimore to New York in 2 hours. Now, granted, it's not a long, but baby, he was hauling it. Oh, yeah, he was hauling it. He was going to get to his baby. Yeah, he was going to get to his baby. I'm thinking from my house to New York, it takes me about 3.5 hours. So it's not ridiculous. It's not unreasonable, but it's still, she wasn't doing the speed limit. I'm going to tell you that. Her daddy wasn't doing the speed limit. Now that I can promise you. It was more, daddy wasn't playing. Now let me finish reading what happened. Mr. Richards' father drove from New York to Baltimore and arrived at the studio approximately 2 hours later. Only after her father arrived and demanded to see her did Mr. Pierre order Mr. Combs' bodyguard to release Miss Richards from the vehicle. Mr. Pierre ushered her father between several rooms at the studio where he waited for approximately 2 hours before being able to confront Mr. Combs. Once Miss Richards' father expressed that he intended to contact the police, Mr. Combs warned him to think about your family and think about your daughter's career. Her father appeared visibly frightened by Mr. Combs' threats and actions, which in turn made Miss Richards feel terrified for herself and her family's safety. The next night, Diddy Dirty Money performed on Saturday Night Live. Mr. Combs subsequently called Miss Richards, complimented her performance, and concluded with a threat. "You don't call your dad unless you're in the hospital." Bitch. Yeah. 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 I, I I have so many thoughts, y'all, but I'm gonna keep reading because we still got a little ways to go. But I'm gonna keep reading. We know that the last few pages is about what they want and compensation and all of that. But we got a few more pages to get through. This next section is called Unjust Enrichment of Defendants by Breach of Contract and or Copyright Infringement. So this is where they're going to get into the money and why they feel like Diddy owed them money and how much money Diddy owe her. Okay. As a member of DK, Ms. Richard has performed on over 15 songs and holds composition credits on more than 3. Defendants have failed to account or to pay Ms. Richard as agreed for her compensation, for her compositions and her performances, and have breached contracts and infringed her copyright, all of which has unjustly enriched defendants. As a member of Diddy Dirty Money, Ms. Richard has performed, recorded on over 9 songs. Additionally, Ms. Richard has composition rights and credits on more than 5 songs. Defendants have failed to account for or pay Ms. Richards as agreed for her composition. And then they list all the songs here that she either sang on or she wrote on. So they give you that information. In 2020, Mr. Combs selected Ms. Richard for a reboot of Making the Band, and Ms. Richard spent hours preparing to be a judge on the show. However, C-19 pandemic halted those plans, and Ms. Richard was never compensated in any way. On or about July the 1st of 2021, Mr. Combs of Bad Boy Records directed Janice Combs Publishing, Inc. to assign its administration rights of Ms. Richards' song. So again, they're listing all of that here. Held from her tenure with defendants over the years of 2005 to 2012. The assignment assigned by Ms. Richards on October the 2nd of 2024 purported to credit through a semi-annual accounting Ms. Richards' royalty account for Ms. Richards' composition from between 80 to 90% of publisher's share. However, no statements were ever provided, no payments were ever made, and no revisions nor assignments were ever recorded with performing rights organizations or other royalty collecting entities by defendants or by Sony. Defendants have wholly failed to account to or pay Ms. Richard as agreed for her compositions and her performances in breach of the assignment, and to have thereby infringed her copyrights, resulting in defendants being unjustly enriched. During the summer 2023, Mr. Combs' new record company, Love Records, tendered a contract for negotiation to Ms. Richard for the song entitled Deliver Me, embodied on track 3 of the Love album, Off the Grid, officially released on September the 15th of 2003. Upon information and belief, Deliver Me sold well prior to Mr. Combs' legal troubles in November 2023. Continuing to present, Ms. Richards sought to establish her rightful percentage as a 21% composer on Deliver Me. Mr. Combs personally called Ms. Richards and left a voicemail complaining about her fair request. Upon information and belief, Mr. Combs directed his attorneys to avoid confirming confirming the composition percentages on the song, and in fact list composers who played no part in composing the song. As a result, the contract was never signed by either Ms. Richards or Love Record. Nevertheless, Ms. Richard obtained a copyright registration certificate on a timely basis. Said registration lists author, claimants, and agreed that when the song was created in 2009. That registration is filed separately in the court and supports Ms. Richards' claim of copyright infringement by defendants herein. Defendants, Love Records, and Mr. Combs infringed on Ms. Richards' copyrights and the composition of Deliver Me by releasing Deliver Me without Ms. Richards' permission and without compensation. So then it goes into damages, what they're asking for. Of course, this is a civil case. They're asking for money. They're asking for, damages, lawyers' fees, back pay, all of those things. First cause of action, violation of the victim of gender-motivated violence. We've talked about that multiple times. You guys know what that's all about. Second cause of action, sexual assault pursuant to the California Sexual Abuse and Cover-Up Accountability Act. Again, she outlined where he, touched her and after she asked him not to, and all of those things. Third cause of action, forced labor in violation of U.S. law. Sixth cause of action, violation of the California, here it is, Trafficking Victims Protection Act. She says she is a victim of trafficking within the meaning of California Penal Code. And they tell you which code it is. Depriving and violating her personal liberty with the intent to obtain forced labor. And it goes on to break that down. Seven cause of action, assault under New York law. She alleged the assault. Eighth cause of action, battery and sexual battery under New York law. 10th cause of action, false imprisonment under California law. 11th cause of action, intentional infliction of emotional distress. 12th cause of action, sexual harassment, gender discrimination, and hostile work environment under New York State human rights law. 13th cause of action, sexual gender discrimination and hostile work environment under New York State human rights law. 14th cause of action, retaliation in violation of New York State human rights law. 15th cause of action, hostile work environment in violation of California government code. 16th cause of action, gender discrimination in violation of California government code. 17th cause of action, violation of rights of publicity under New York civil rights law. 18th cause of action, copyright infringement. 19th cause of action, breach of contract. 20th cause of action, breach of implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. 20th cause of action, fraud, intentional misrepresentation, false promise against all defendants. And then it tells you the prayer for relief, which of course they're saying what they want. And yes, this is Lisa Bloom. Respectfully, Lisa Bloom. There are about 5 other names here, but y'all know it's mainly Lisa Bloom. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. There are a couple of places that I'm stuck. If I'm being honest, there are a couple of places that I'm stuck. I am still stuck. I am still stuck with him leaving that lady in the UK. Even if, now, according to Don, he had sexually assaulted her the night before. Let's just say that didn't happen. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but just for the sake of argument, let's just say he didn't do that. Why you leave that lady in a whole different country and take her passport, which means not only did you leave her, you are trying to make it hard for her to get home. Like you literally abandoned her and took her documentation. Anybody here who has ever traveled outside of the country? Now, the first time I went outside of the country, I made a color copy of my passport and I scanned the document to myself. So if I had lost my passport, I could go into my email and I still had a color copy of my passport. And I had printed it. So I had a printed copy of my, because the first time I went out of the country, it was a cruise. So I left my passport on the ship And whenever I got off the ship, I would just take that paper document with me. So if somebody stole it or if I lost it, I was still good. My passport was still on the ship, right? But yeah, that's crazy as hell. Right, course correction. That's why I always kept a copy of it. But just the idea, that is so diabolical, y'all. So diabolical. Yeah, somebody said we need to find that assistant. Yeah, she didn't say the assistant's name, but right. I wonder if it was Capricorn, because she never said who that particular assistant was, but she did talk about Capricorn early on in the lawsuit. Yeah, I'm sure but Angela, can you imagine? I mean, obviously she got home, but just y'all. That is the latest in the Diddy saga. Now let me give y'all a few little tidbits before we get off of here. Because I'm gonna try to get y'all a double header. I'm gonna try to come back for a regular tribe meeting because there's some other stuff we gotta talk about that's going on. But let me give y'all a little hey Julie Sugarbaker, I ain't seen you in a while, boo. According to my sources, they are building a case against Diddy. They're trying to build a case. Now, again, that's why I kept mentioning certain things that was said in that lawsuit. When you hear certain language being used about the trafficking and the drug use and the transportation of women, and you notice that she threw men in there too, and she noticed how they kept saying that, they looked underage, right? All of that is a setup, y'all. All of that is a language, and that is a setup, in my opinion. Now, here's what I find interesting. When Aubrey gonna say something? When she gonna file her lawsuit? Aubrey been telling us for years that she got the goods. When we gonna get her story? She claims that's part of why she got fired from Danity Kane, because she wouldn't give Diddy none. She been talking, but I mean, when she gonna put it in a lawsuit? When we gonna get the story? You know what I'm saying, Quake? You feel what I'm saying? Y'all, we still on Southern District of New York watch. We are still on the Southern District of New York watch, because my understanding is if and when an indictment comes down, it's coming through the Southern District of New York. That's what I'm told. If and when an indictment comes down, it is coming through the Southern District of New York. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and get off of here. Like I said, I'm going to try to get y'all a double header. We're going to try to, I'm not sure if El Teddy's going live or not. I know he's at a work thing. So did he schedule a live? Because he just tried to call me a minute ago. He told me he wasn't going live, but he just called me a minute ago. So I wonder if because if he's got, I'm gonna send y'all over there if he's live. No, he don't have nothing scheduled. All right, I will talk to him and see if he's going live. If he's going to go live, we're going to go over there. But if not, I'm going to try to get you guys a double header, okay? All right, I'll talk to y'all later. He said no last night. Okay, he just tried to call me, but he might have been trying to call me about something totally different, child. All right, y'all, we out. See y'all in a little bit, hopefully.